You're listening to the Catholic Wives with Toxic In-Laws podcast. Today's episode is all about whether toxic grandparents are running your parenting show. Are you a Catholic wife grappling with challenging in-laws? The Catholic Wives with Toxic In-Laws podcast is your sanctuary for navigating the sometimes stormy seas of life with toxic in-laws while being validated for what you've experienced. Join me, your host, Miriam Susan, a Catholic wife who's weathered 3 decades of in-law drama, as we tackle the tough issues you're dealing with head on. Hi, I'm Miriam Susan, your host of the Catholic Wives with Toxic In-Laws podcast, and today is part 2 of a series that I've been doing this May, all about toxic grandparents. And just to preface this, we are talking about truly toxic personalities when we have these discussions. And what that means, what I mean by toxic grandparents or toxic in-laws or toxic parents or whatever, it means that there is a demonstrated pattern over a period of time where it's not just like a one-time thing. Like it's not just one day where your mother-in-law shows up and gives your child a movie that you have specifically told her not to give them. That is not what I'm talking about. What I'm talking about is the toxicity that is seen over time. So when you see a pattern, meaning you've seen something happen at least 3 times. One time can be just like a one-time thing. 2 times could be a coincidence. But when you see it 3 or more times, and it's happening around the same scenario, or it's happening kind of in a really similar way, that's when we start to see and call out something as a pattern. And that is what makes somebody toxic versus just human, right? I mean, as Catholics, we need to be focused on seeing others as humans, as fellow human beings, and showing them that love and respect. But we also need to have discernment, right? And the Holy Spirit gives us a level of discernment, and we can start to notice patterns. Now, it doesn't mean that we are accusing our in-laws or our parents or our siblings in-law of having certain personality disorders, having any specific psychological issues. We're just talking about patterns that are unhealthy for our families. And when we talk about the proper order of a Catholic family, as a wonderful therapist shared with my husband and I, we're talking about having God at the center of your life. And as a family, this is God at the center of your family. And then the next ring of importance after God is your spouse. And again, this is for a properly ordered Catholic family. And then the third ring after God, after your spouse, is your children. And that is what a properly ordered family should look like. Now, we have cousins, we have parents, we have friends, we have coworkers, aunts and uncles, neighbors, siblings, in-laws, acquaintances, parish members. Those all come outside of this core circle. So when toxic behavior comes into play when it comes to a properly ordered family, it's when somebody in this outside area decides that they want to be in one of these 3 areas. Maybe they don't explicitly say it, but their behaviors, their actions show that they want to be more important than your spouse. Or they want to have control and influence over your children that's not theirs to have. Or, in the worst scenario, is when parents or in-laws insert themselves, or even siblings, into the center. And everything in the family, they want to revolve around them. Whether they say so or not, it's, well, the family gathering doesn't work for so-and-so. We need to make it work for them. They want to celebrate Christmas this way. That's the way we're going to do it. So that's when toxic people can start to kind of infiltrate what a proper ordered Catholic family is. And for many of us, myself included, when we are dealing with toxic in-laws, the in-laws try to kind of insert themselves right around here, maybe like right at the edge of God and spouse. They definitely want to be more important than you in your husband's life, in your family's life. Maybe not quite to God, but maybe they do. Maybe they do want to be almost like the God in your family. And so I just want to bring that back around because I know I talk about toxic relationships a lot. And toxic is just one of those topics that can be very divisive, very trendy. And I don't mean for it to be that way. I don't want to just throw out the word toxic just for clicks. Okay. So we need to keep that in mind. And I have so many episodes that talk in, more specificity about the proper order of a Catholic family, how these things work. But I felt like it was important to bring it back around to this idea of what a properly ordered Catholic family is when we're talking about the grandparents' influence. And that's my theme for this month. And basically what I'm saying in this month, in this series of episodes, is that there are either your in-laws or your parents who are trying to come into this ring, this series of rings, to have a place of importance that is not theirs to claim. Yes, we are taught to honor our father and mother. Yes, we are taught to, by the catechism and by the church, to give our parents and our in-laws a certain level of respect. But that love and that level of respect does not mean that they get to come and take a place that is not theirs to claim. So with all that being said, let's go ahead and get into the scripture reference for today's episode. It comes from the book of Ephesians, chapter 6, verse 4, and this is from the New Revised Standard Version Catholic Edition. And it says, "And fathers, do not provoke your children to anger, but bring them up in the discipline and instruction of the Lord." So here's a scenario that is probably very familiar for you. Let's say you are visiting with your in-laws over dinner, and you said to your children, and made sure that your in-laws heard, no sugar before dinner. Maybe you have a little one that is just as sugar crazed as I am and really, really wanted a cookie, and grandma feels bad, but she also heard and perhaps already knows your rules about no sugar before dinner. So grandma gave your child a cookie anyway, right in front of you. And then she looked at you like you were the problem. So today I want to talk about what that moment and similar moments actually cost your kids, even when it seems so small, because you're just talking about a cookie, right? It's not a big deal. It's just one cookie. It's just one meal until it's not, until it's more than just one cookie at one meal. All right. So the first thing we need to understand is this kind of dynamic. Even if your mother-in-law didn't say anything, even if she just handed the cookie and gave you a look, that creates confusion in your children. Because children need consistent behavior, consistent standards to feel safe. Even when they act like they don't, all of us are designed by a God who is a God of order. He's a God of structure. The Mass is a perfect example. There are certain things we're supposed to do in Mass because that's how God designed it. God is a God of order. We can look at nature and see that God is a God of order. So when our children don't have consistent rules, consistent authority, consistent parents, it causes confusion. And so when a grandparent steps in and overrides your decision as the parent, even something really small, like I said, even something small like the cookie, the message that our child receives is that mommy and daddy aren't really in charge, or mommy and daddy are mean and grandma and grandpa are nice, or mommy and daddy's rules don't matter. And kids pick up on that. They pick up on that little crack in the authority that is God given to us. And the thing with children is they don't have words for it. They just feel it. And, this isn't about, like I said, this isn't about just one cookie. It's about this, the children trying to figure out which voice, which figure in their lives holds the most weight in their home. And our children don't have words for it. My youngest daughter is the perfect example. She did not know about the true issues that we had with my in-laws until, 2019. And so she would have been 13 or 14. So at age 13 or 14, we had to start talking about it because of an issue that happened surrounding our youngest son's baptism, and things just were crazy. And we had to finally sit down and be transparent with our children about some of the issues that were going on. No, we did not rehash everything that had happened over the previous, 23, almost 23 years. Actually over 23 years if you include when we were dating and engaged. We didn't sit down and tell him everything, but for that long, we had basically protected my in-laws' reputation for our, to our children. So our children had no idea. Let me take that back. They did have an idea. They just didn't understand, because here we were, their mom and dad, acting like everything was normal on the surface, but behind the scenes, they saw and felt the tension that was there every time we got together with my in-laws. They saw how my health was affected and how I would be laid up in bed for days after having a visit because of all the stress and anxiety that just being around my in-laws caused, because it was like I was always walking on eggshells. And so my daughter shared in an interview that I did, I think it's episode 42, she does not ever remember a time being around her grandparents that wasn't tense. So even though I wasn't telling her at 3, 4, 5, 6 years old what was going on, she could feel it. And chances are your kids feel it too. And I thought we were doing an awesome job at hiding how tense things were, because I didn't want to be that mom that talked bad about her grandma. So we hid it, but not completely. We just hid it with our words, but we couldn't hide it with our actions. So even though maybe your 3-year-old doesn't have the words to say, that it doesn't feel right, that grandma offered me a cookie when you said no, and that sounds very confusing to me, they know. Children can pick up on our body language and just how we feel and act before and after these interactions with whoever this toxic person is in their lives. And this month, we're talking about toxic grandparents. So when our in-laws do these kinds of things, when they start to step into that role of authority that is not theirs to claim, it gets framed as love. Because most toxic people are not going to say, yes, I'm toxic. They're going to frame it as how they show love to our children. And so they never frame their overstepping as overstepping. They frame it as spoiling, as, well, this is tradition, or this is just what grandparents do. But I need to acknowledge that that framing is really a hard argument to go up against, right? Because on the surface, it sounds really sweet. It sounds really kind. It's like, oh my goodness, yeah, they do just want to love on my children. But the statement of, well, that's just what grandparents do, is doing a lot of kind of underground work. It is positioning your parenting decisions as an obstacle that is standing between grandparents and grandchild. And my friends, that should not be. Grandparents should never, ever put themselves in that position where it's like, oh, well, mommy and daddy they're really the obstacle to allowing us to show love to you in the way that we want. Because your authority in your child's life is God-given, God-appointed as number one after God. Right? So in a proper order of a Catholic family, God is number one for that child. And number two is you and your spouse, not the grandparents. Now, again, this is talking about a scenario where husband and wife are still married. there's not any kind of joint custody or any kind of situation where the grandparents are maybe court-appointed guardians. We're talking about husband and wife who are married, raising kids, and grandparents coming in and trying to drive a wedge, which is a favorite phrase of toxic people, drive a wedge between a child and his or her parents. That is not healthy. And that is not how God designed families to be. So, when you object to however your parents or your toxic in-laws want to demonstrate love to your children, and I say love because love should always be seeking the good of the other, and the good of a child is always to have a respect and a love towards their respectful and loving parents, right? So when you object, then you become the joyless one. You become the one who won't let grandma or grandpa love on her grandkids. You become that person. And hello, I was labeled that person. I remember one year, my husband and I decided that our kids just had too much stuff. We had 4 girls at that point, and when you have 4 of the same gender in a row, you tend to have a lot of stuff. We had dress-up clothes, we had dolls, we had stuffed animals, we had Barbies, we had doll houses, we had so much stuff. And so one year, my husband and I decided, let's tell both sets of grandparents that instead of toys for Christmas, we would really appreciate if the grandparents would buy some kind of experience. We were thinking like passes to the zoo, passes to the aquarium, a trip of some sort, ballet classes, something like that. And my parents have always been the kind that just would write a check. Like that was just easier for her. It's fine by me. It allowed us a certain level of control over what our kids got or didn't get. And I remember that there was very little pushback from my parents, but my in-laws pulled out this card. It's like, you're not letting us love our grandchildren the way we want to love them. Now, I will give them full credit that they came around and they ended up gifting my older 2 girls classes, drama classes. But there was a catch because it was at their homeschool group on their side of this big city. So there was a big city. We lived on one side, they lived on the other. And so the kids, because of the timing of these classes, basically had to spend the night at their grandparents' house, unsupervised by us, so that they could attend these classes. Now, at the time, we didn't really have much of an issue because a lot of the things with my in-laws had not seemed very severe at that point. And then they did progress and get much worse after those classes were over. So that's the kind of thing I'm talking about. When you put forth a simple boundary, hey, we don't want to do presents this year. Please do experiences. And then they push back and pull out this grandparent card. It's like, well, you're not letting me love my grandkids as I want to. And that's a problem. So I have a question for you. Have your in-laws ever made you feel like enforcing your own rules was something that you needed to apologize for? Has that ever happened? Chances are you're nodding your head because it has. And these are your rules. You and your husband came up with them. It's your decision. You're the parents. You should not feel the need to apologize for a decision that you and your husband made together regarding your children. So the real question that is kind of like the foundation of all of this is, it's not about rules about cookies. It's not about rules about spending the night. It's not rules about gifts for birthdays and Christmas. It's about who has the authority to raise your children. Now, Ephesians 6:4 makes it clear that the charge, the vocation, the responsibility of raising children in the Lord rests on our shoulders, the parents. Full stop. Sometimes that doesn't work out. Sometimes that that charge has to be passed on to a grandparent or your in-laws. But that's not what I'm talking about. That's not a suggestion that the responsibility to raise your children rests on yours and your husband's shoulders. It doesn't. That is a God-appointed responsibility. So here's the thing. Even if your in-laws or your parents mean well, even if they genuinely love your children, unconditional love, the love that seeks the good of the other, that does not transfer the authority to raise them from you to them. Loving your grandchildren does not change the authority. Just because your in-laws or just because your parents truly, genuinely love your children does not mean that they now have a position of authority in your children's lives when it comes to raising them. Because love and authority are two different things. So I want you to really sit with Ephesians 6:4. Let me go back and read it again. It says, "Fathers, do not provoke your children to anger, but bring them up in the discipline and instruction of the Lord." Bring them up in the discipline and instruction of the Lord. Don't see this as a weapon, but as a quiet reminder that this parenting mission was given by God to you. Nobody else was handed that assignment. Your parents and your in-laws, they have already had their opportunity to parent. They've graduated. Yes, they will always be your mom, or they will always be your husband's dad. Yes, but the active job of parenting has finished now that they have adult children. That job of raising and training their children is done. Now they get to be grandparents, which is a lesser important role in the lives of their children and their children's children. Not a role that needs to be forgotten, but it's just not of primary importance anymore. That's just how it goes. As much as we don't like it, if that's just how it is. That's how God created it. So nobody else was handed that assignment to raise and train up your children. Not your mother-in-law, not your own mother, not your father, not your father-in-law, not grandmas and grandpas, but you. So what does that feel like to own that fully? I hope it feels empowering. I hope it feels freeing to know that your in-laws or your parents don't really have a say in how your kids are raised, because God gave you that job. God gave your husband that job to raise those children that God has given you. So if this has resonated with you, if you have ever felt like you were part of a big team in parenting your children when really it should just be you and your husband, then I want you to take today's episode as permission to notice that. This is your permission slip. I'm handing it to you right now. This is your permission slip to notice that you have been kind of put on the bench a few times in your parenting, and somebody else has gone up to bat that is not your husband, to add in a little baseball reference, a sport that I'm not very familiar with, outside of just PE classes in school. Your job is not to be on the bench as a parent. Your job is to be out there actively participating in your children's lives. And if somebody else has tried to relegate you to the bench so that they can step in your place, I'm not talking about pinch hitting. I'm not talking about, if you're pregnant and you're very sick and you need somebody to come and help you for a short period of time. That is an unusual circumstance. That is not the norm. But if somebody has said, no, my desires are greater than yours, you take a back seat, That's not how it's supposed to be. That's not how God designed it, and that's not how the vocation of being a mother is supposed to be. Again, I think it helps to remember that our parents and our in-laws, they've already had this opportunity. They've already raised at least your husband and you. You are now an emancipated adult. Their job parenting you is done. Yes, you can still seek out counsel or advice from your elders, but their parenting job is done. Just because you have kids come along doesn't mean that this is their parenting 2.0, their parenting second chance. No. This is your responsibility to raise your children. So I hope that this permission to be the mom, to embrace your vocation, is very freeing. And it helps bring some clarity into these times when you have conflicting things going on, when you have these outside influences that are trying to come in to this circle where they don't belong in this properly ordered Catholic family. And I hope it reminds you this is a job that you were called to do. Whether you have children through adoption or through natural childbirth, conception, however you came to be a parent, this is your vocation. And it's not right for us to give somebody else that driver's seat when it's our responsibility. So if this is familiar, if this feels like, I had somebody tell me recently that they felt like my podcast, that I was like inside her head. I'm inside your head because I've been there. It's inside my head too, because I have lived this. I have walked this. And if you want to be surrounded by other women who nod their heads at the same time you do during these episodes, then I'd love to have you join me at the community that I have at toxicinlaws.com. This is a small but growing group of just beautiful women who are dealing with just so many of the same struggles. They struggle with, their in-laws being demanding or controlling or manipulative. And it doesn't just end with the children. It can be with their own marriages or their own finances. But we all have this similar journey that we're on. And it's so refreshing to have somebody who gets it, to have somebody who understands what you're going through. So if that sounds like something that you're interested in, please accept this invitation to come and join us at toxicinlaws.community. There is a paid upgrade if you wish to get access to some paid trainings that I have in there, but the community is absolutely free. So I hope to see you in there and just share what you need prayers for. I'd love to pray for you. I do pray for all of you who are listening, even if you've never reached out, even if you've never left a comment, even if you've never sent me an email, I am praying for you because I know how difficult this journey is. God bless you. Go in peace. Disclaimer. All content and information on this podcast and our website, including our programs, products, and/or services, is for information and educational purposes only and does not constitute professional medical, psychiatric, or mental health advice of any kind, and does not establish any kind of professional client relationship by your listening to this podcast or use of my website. A professional client relationship with you is only formed after we have expressly entered into a written agreement with you that you have signed, including our fee structure and other terms to work with you in a specific matter. Although we strive to provide accurate general information, the information presented here is not a substitute for any kind of professional advice, and you should not rely solely on this information. Always consult a professional in the area for your particular needs and circumstances prior to making any professional, medical, or mental health related decisions.